Have you been in the dark when it comes to HTML and CSS? Well, I'm going to show you exactly how to create this fully responsive design that works in a browser and your tablets and your phones here in this crash course. Hello everybody, what's up? Gary Simon here. So it's the beginning of 2021 and I like to do refresher crash courses in various topics in HTML, CSS, and basically front-end development is one of them that I like to do. So just a couple weeks ago, I showed you all how to create this design here using Adobe Experience Design in a crash course that I made. Pretty nice, modern looking design, has a mobile version, and so that's what I'm going to do. In this video, we're gonna make this a reality in the browser and make it work, and I'll show you one more time. And we're gonna make it function by writing HTML and CSS in a little bit of JavaScript just to make that little mobile menu work. And it's gonna be fully responsive, or in other words, it's going to work on multiple devices. No matter what the device size is, it's going to look and work and function great. All right, so a couple things I want to mention before we start. Who is this crash course for? Well, if you're a beginner and you just want kind of like a quick look at what front-end development is, which is the writing of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, this will be for you. But I have to say, it is a crash course. I'm packing so much information in here. Sometimes it's intermediate to advanced level concepts that there's no way, if you're an absolute beginner, that by the end of watching this, you're gonna be able to just do this on your own without looking up Google or whatever. Your head's gonna be spinning, but if you pay close attention, you should walk away with a pretty decent understanding of how all this stuff works. And that's my goal. So of course, if you're intermediate, you could also probably take away even more from this course because you're gonna have that foundational experience first. But nonetheless, I am gonna do my best to explain all the basic concepts as much as possible as it pertains to HTML, CSS, and that tiny little bit of JavaScript. So with that said, one more thing I do wanna show you is if you're interested in UI, UX design, go to my site, DesignCourse.com. Right now, it's not ready yet, so you have to enter your email to be notified, but it might be ready depending on when you're watching this. All right, so with that said, make sure to subscribe if you enjoy this, and let's get started. But wait 1 second. You're about to watch my crash course on front-end development. Now, if you're really interested in learning front-end development in a robust environment, then you should definitely check out the sponsor of this video, Scrimma.com.
They've recently launched their front-end development career path, which is a collection of courses that cover HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, and much, much more, as you see. It's over 75 hours of awesome content. There are hundreds of interactive coding challenges, and it's all geared towards helping you go from beginner to someone that's hireable as a front-end developer. So check out the first link in the description below to get 50% off.
All right, so when it comes to front-end development, the very first thing that you need before you write any code is going to be a place to write your code or a piece of software, and that is referred to as a code editor. All right, so there are many different code editors, but the one that's been the most popular in my experience for the last 4 or 5 years or so is Visual Studio Code. Does this mean that you have to use it? No. If there's something else like Sublime Text or something else that you've been using and you're more comfortable with that, go right ahead. But Visual Studio Code is what I'm going to be using. It's free and it's very robust. It's easy to use as well, so that's what we're going to use. So if you want to download that and you haven't yet, just go to code.visualstudio.com. This is from Microsoft. Like I said, it's free, and just download it and install it. It also has a Mac OS version as well. All right, and so once you get that installed, go ahead and run it. And when you run it, you're going to see something like this, basically. What we want is we want to start a new project. So I've created a folder already. In fact, if we go right here to view and we come down to a terminal, you'll see right here we have like a code area. It's like basically where you're currently at in terms of your folders. So if you want to make like a new project folder for this, don't type that command. Just wait a second. go ahead and just type in mkdir. That means make directory, or directory is another name for a folder. And then just name it something like 2021 front end, like that, and then hit enter. And that gave me that error because I already created that folder. But assuming it doesn't exist for you as well, it'll automatically create it. And then after creating it, you type cd 2021 front end. Now we can close this, and then you can go to open folder and then just choose 2021 front end. You may have to navigate to your folder depending on where you're at in your current machine. And then when you do that, just hit select folder, and then it'll be this blank area. So right here, I'll just do a real quick and extremely quick overview of the user interface here with Visual Studio Code. Over here, you have you're basically like a sidebar navigation where we have what's called the Explorer. And when you click on it, it kind of collapses this area right here, which is referred to as the Explorer. Right here, we're not going to be running and debugging anything. You can search for files and folders like that. You have what's called source control. Again, we're not going to be messing with that at all. And then we also have plugins, and we're going to install two different plugins here. The Live Sass compiler. So if you search for that, just type Live Sass compiler and then click on it. There will be an install button right here. I already have it installed. So install that, and then also Live Server as well. We'll install that too. And then when you install these, it'll automatically restart Visual Studio Code. So then you're going to find, in a second, you're going to find the actual code editor when we create files. So we want to create a file right here, and we're going to click on this little new file button, and we're going to name it index.html. All right, so whenever you're working with HTML files, you give it a name and then .html. Hit enter. And after creating that, you'll see we have this little icon, and then it creates this little document right here with this blinking cursor and all the code lines. This is where you write your HTML. Exciting stuff. Now, before we write anything, we're going to also create a folder. All right, so in this folder, we're going to name it CSS. Do we have to create a CSS folder? No, but it's nice to have your files organized. And so we're going to create inside of here, once this is selected, another file, and then we're going to name that. I think I'll just name this main.scss. Now, you're probably wondering, why not write it as main.css? Well, that's a great question. You can, if you just want to write what's called strict CSS, you can just put main.css right here if you wish. But I'm going to use something called Sass, which is CSS with a few different superpowers. And I'll explain that in a second, but that's why we installed the Live Sass compiler plugin. So I'm going to right click, rename this to SCSS, all right? And then we're going to click right here after you have that Live Sass compiler installed, watch Sass. All right, it's going to bring up the terminal area, or the output area rather. We can just hide this for now. Now, when we did that, it created these two other files. You can ignore the .map file, but we could see that there's also a main.css file, all right? And it's empty, basically. This is just a comment. And so what it's doing is when we start to write CSS a little bit later on in this course, it's going to take everything we write here and it's going to basically compile it down into regular CSS. You'll see the difference when we get to the CSS portion. So hopefully I'm not confusing you too much, but you should understand once we get to that point in time. All right, so if we go back to our index.html, we're also going to right click on the index.html file, open with Live Server. And that's the Live Server plugin that we installed. So this won't be there if you didn't install it. So now it's opened up your browser, all right? So you see we have this big blank page. It may say 127.0.0.1:5500 / your index.html. So this is what your site will look like when it's in the browser. Now, one thing that's awesome about this Live Server plugin is every time you make an adjustment or an update in your code and hit save, like Control S, it will reflect that automatically. It'll automatically refresh the browser for you. So because we're going to get started with what's called mobile first CSS, mobile first design, we're going to take our browser and squish it into the, into almost what looks like to be a really large, really tall phone. All right, so that's why I'm pushing this all the way over to the right side of my browser. We're also going to, as you can see, live reload is not possible without a body or head tag. Don't worry about that. We'll fix that in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and take this over here, our Visual Studio Code window, and then put it right next to there. So now we have both of these in view so that we can see what we're doing. All right, so that little error or the little message that just showed up, it can't work without a body or a head tag. Well, what does that mean? Well, before I explain, we're going to hit Shift. Now, this is only going to work in Visual Studio Code, by the way, so hopefully you're using Visual Studio Code. This is what's called an emmet abbreviation. When you hit exclamation point enter, it's going to create like this big code snippet, and it's going to output a bunch of these lines of HTML. And that just helps you if you want to try to move quickly. It helps you get all of that quick boilerplate HTML out of the way, because this is all stuff that's standard that you see in every HTML document. So it's just a real fast way to get started. And there's a lot of other abbreviations, as they're called, that allow you to write HTML quicker, and I'll show you what those are as well. I don't want to jump ahead of myself too much. This is a crash course, but I do want to show you some quick ways of doing things. So if you're looking at this code right here, and by the way, let's go ahead and hit save. Now, is our live server working? It is not working. So test 2, there we go. So you may have to refresh after you've put in the HTML and the head and all that stuff. So now every time you actually save something or do something and hit save, it automatically shows up here in the browser. So that's live reloading. All right, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about the structure of HTML and what all this stuff is. So in general, you have a few different, your HTML document is structured in a certain way, and they're all structured in this same way. You have what's called the doc type right here, the HTML. Always leave that there. You don't ever edit that or adjust that. We also have what's called the HTML tag. Now notice how there's two different types of tags, or a tag is basically, or an element is opened up with this little greater than or less than sign, and then greater than sign. You have a closing tag and then a self-closing tag. So a self-closing tag would be something like this, where it says meta charset equals UTF-8. If you don't understand what that is, don't worry, you don't even need to really at this point. But notice how there's no closing tag. A closing tag would be where it opens up, but then a little while later, you see the same thing. It says title here, and then this one says title, but has a slash in front of it. That's closing the tag, but you have some content inside of it. Right here, it would be the opposite. This is a self-closing tag. There's nothing embedded in it. It's just one line, and that's it. Well, when it comes to the HTML on line 2, which is generally where you see the HTML tag, this is a closing tag. It's not self-closing because we see HTML opened up here, and then we also see it closed down here. All right, and so we have all this stuff in the middle. So really, if we wanted to, you can indent those in, which gives you a visual cue about kind of the hierarchical structure of your HTML tags, in which are parents, in which are children or siblings, like right here. Like these would be child elements of this parent element. All right, so you always have an HTML tag. You don't ever have to think about that tag, and especially if you hit that emmet abbreviation exclamation point and hit enter. All this stuff I generally don't ever touch unless we're talking about the title, because the title is what shows up right here. Notice how it says document. It says document here if you hover over it in your browser. Well, if I type in the 2021 front-end developer crash course, it's going to update that up here as well. And so that's what people will see in their browser title, in their browser window for that given tab. Another thing we're going to want to add is a new element right here, and it has to be within the head tag somewhere, okay? So the head tag has several different meta tags. All right, this right here, we can just ignore these meta tags. You don't really ever have to adjust them. There's also some other ones you may want to add as well, like the meta description, as it's called. And this kind of gives like browsers like Google the just little description that shows up underneath the link, which is, and the link, by the way, is it gets this from the title right here. And then there's also meta keywords, and that's good for search engine optimization and stuff like that. But right now, we're not going to add those tags. But you also see the title tag, of course. You need to have a title. And then we also, if we want to use some CSS, and we want to have that CSS in a different file, we can type in link. And here, again, is an Emmet abbreviation, so we don't have to type all this stuff manually. Hit enter. And here we go. Now it says link rel equals style sheet, and then href equals blank. All right. So it automatically puts the cursor there for us for that Emmet abbreviation. And we're going to reference the path. I'm going to hit Control B to get that sidebar out. The path of our CSS file, which happens to be CSS folder / main.css. We don't want to reference the Sass file because our Sass is only for writing code. We can only use .css right here. All right. So I know right now you're probably still confused a lot about what's happening, but don't worry. Another general structure of HTML so we talked about the HTML elements or the HTML tags. You also talk about what are these things? Like you can see inside of the actual elements, there are these things that equal and then, values. Those are called attributes, all right? So a lot of different HTML tags have attributes that you can use. All right, some are specific to that tag and some you can use, in different areas. For instance, if you wanted to create what's called a hyperlink, like a little underlined piece of text that's sometimes blue that people can click on or tap or whatever with their finger to go to a different page, that would look like this, for instance. If I hit A, we can see an href is there as well as here. So it all depends on which HTML element you're using and which tags or attributes that accompany them. And that would be a great way or area for me to show you this right here, w3schools.com. This basically is like think of it as the Bible or the dictionary of HTML. All right. So if we go, if you go to this URL right here and we type in A, we'll see the tag right here. Tells you it defines a hyperlink. It shows you what it looks like. And it has a definition and usage. It has tips and notes. And it has all the attributes that we were just talking about that it can accept. As you can see, there's a lot. Most of these you're not going to use in everyday hyperlinks or in everyday A tags right here. But it does tell you, and this is an excellent resource that shows you examples of it and how to use it. And it has it for, these are all HTML elements. Look how many there are. Again, in most projects or a single project, you're not going to use most of these. In fact, I've never used whatever this is, BDI. I don't know what that is, just to be honest. So when you see all this stuff, right now, you're going through this crash course. Don't get overwhelmed. It is a crash course, so it has that side effect because we're moving fast. But just understand, a lot of this stuff you're never going to use, and you're not going to need to use it. And you'll see that going forward. All right, so that W3 Schools reference, in Google, of course, if you type in whatever you're having problems with, those are going to be invaluable resources going forward. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rid of this. Now, you have your head right here, and generally, you're not sitting there coding inside of your head, your head tags. You're coding and you're working within the body right here. This is where all of your HTML writing pretty much like 95% of it resides. This is where we're going to be putting all of our information. Notice before when I was just typing, like I was hitting the keys and I hit save, it showed up right there. So this is the whole body section. Another thing I want to show you, I'm using Google Chrome. Firefox is an acceptable browser as well to use. Hit Control-Shift-I on your keyboard, and this little thing's going to show up over here. And these are the developer tools that we have. If we click on Elements, you're going to see kind of like a weird representation of what's happening over here in a code editor. And we can see we have our HTML lang up there, then we have our head, and we can expand this stuff down and look at it. And if we click right here, we can see the body tag, all right? So the body tag has this information, and as going forward, you see how this will be a helpful tool. Maybe not right now, but I wanted to show you how to access it at least. And so as well, just another thing to point out, all of our CSS that we're going to be writing, we'll be able to access right here as well. And there's some cool things that we can do that we'll get to. All right. I know we haven't done much talking, but that's all of the overview that I'm going to do in terms of just describing stuff that's here right now. Let's actually get into the process of writing HTML. And like I said, pretty much all happens within this body section here. So when you're working on a project, hopefully, and more often than not, you're going to have a mock-up or a prototype of some sort that will help guide your decisions when you're writing your HTML and your CSS. And so Adobe XD right here, this is a UI UX prototyping design tool. If you didn't catch it in the beginning, I have the whole tutorial about how exactly I design this right here. Here's the mobile version, although that's offset, that should be in the center. There we go. And then over here is the desktop version. So these two things will help guide me when it comes to the CSS and the HTML portion. Now we're going to start, I'm going to move this off here. We're going to start by default working on the mobile version of the site when it comes to the CSS. When it comes to writing your HTML, it doesn't really matter that much which one you look at, because it's all pretty much going to be the same. Although I would probably, let me back that up. I would advocate when you're writing your HTML, which is the first step, the CSS comes after that. Look at the full desktop version because usually the desktop version will contain everything that you need in terms of your elements that you need to account for in the HTML process. So having said that, let's take a look at this right here. So when you're writing your HTML, you work from top down, all right? So the top of this layout, and by the way, the layout's pretty long. The first thing we see, and the first thing that's usual, the typical thing you see, is the navbar section or the header. You usually have a logo, you have a navigation menu of some sort. So that's what we have. So when it comes to writing your HTML, you have to think about things in terms of blocks. Like for instance, the very first thing that we see in the upper left corner is we have this white big sort of bar that goes up there, right? Correct. So we have to create an HTML element that will allow us to define that when we get to the CSS portion. So how do we do that? What tag would we use? Remember all those tags we saw? Well, there's something called semantic HTML, and we're going to get to that in a second. But for now, we're just going to use a div tag. Now, a div tag is something you're going to use a ton, unlike some of those other ones. A div tag basically allows you to physically structure your layout. And so the way we do that, and I'll just write it by hand without using Emmet here for this first demonstration. We open it up, div, that's the HTML element name, and then we type in a class. Now, that's another entirely new concept if you're brand new to HTML. Class equals, and of course class is an attribute, so class equals, and we're going to give it some sort of name that's relevant based on what's happening. I'm going to call it navbar. All right. Now when we close it, automatically the code editor will add a closing tag because this is not a self-closing tag. We're going to hit enter, and then we're going to put some stuff inside of it. So what is a class? All right. So what is the class element? Basically, I should be getting the W3 Schools representation of it, but basically, in a nutshell, it just allows us to take this name right here, and when we get to the CSS portion, we'll be able to reference this name right here as a selector, as it's called. So to put it in even simpler terms, we're giving this HTML element a name so that we can, in the future, when you get to the CSS, we can style it with the CSS, okay? So when we hit save, nothing happens because a div element, nothing renders in the browser if there's nothing inside of it for it to show. So you could see class navbar, and it's up there. It's just hidden. There's nothing in it. All right, so let's go back here. All right, so now we have a block that will allow us to structure that little white bar up top, right? So what comes next here? Well, you would say the logo, and you would be right, but we're going to put another block inside of that block because we're going to have, and you don't have to do this, by the way, we're going to have a block right here inside of this overall block, because when the browser gets large enough, we want to kind of be able to, we want to have a way to keep that nav bar confined to the center. And you'll see what I mean more specifically going forward about that. So we're going to put another one, and this time instead of writing div class, we're just going to put in period. A period is short for a class, so this is an Emmet abbreviation. So we're going to put period container, hit enter. Look at that. It wrote all that stuff for us so that we don't have to do it. So inside of there, so now we have one element that's nested inside of another element, and then we're going to have another element nested inside in this one. Then once we get in here, then we can put that logo. The logo's right here, all right? All right, so this is just a what's called a word mark style logo, which is in the field of identity design, like designing logos. It's called a word mark because there's no symbol, and it's just achievable through text. So normally you might have a graphic file that you'll have to put into your HTML code through an image tag or perhaps a different one. But this one we can achieve just through HTML alone because it's just text, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to make it, we want it clickable, because usually on a logo on a website, it's a standard pattern for people to take their mouse or their fingers if they're on mobile or tablet and click on the logo in order to get to the home page. So that means there's an action that's usually put on to a logo. And in that case, we're going to use a hyperlink or an A tag. So we hit A, and then we see href. So that's, like I showed you earlier, this is where you can put in like another page. Like we can put an index.html because that'll bring you to the home page. That's pretty much what you would want to do anyway. You can also put in other website addresses like http://yahoo.com. I don't know why Yahoo came first to me, but we can also see this is a closing tag, and there's something in the center we can put, which is what's called the anchor text. Again, if all this stuff is confusing, just go to W3 Schools and search for the A tag, and you can see all the stuff that that you can do with it. So go to Yahoo. This is the anchor text. Hit save. Look how it showed up. It's real tiny. If I hit my control, my mouse scroll wheel, I can kind of zoom up here in the browser so you can see it. If we go here, guess what? We're going to yahoo.com. Okay. So we don't need this to go anywhere. So we can either just put in index.html or a hash sign right here, which means it's not going to go anywhere. So now if we click on it, nothing's going to happen. All right. So inside of here, we're going to put I think it's called remember that, right? Am I right or am I wrong? Yes. So we hit save. It says remember that. Now notice it looks nothing like this right here. And that's because we haven't got to the CSS portion. Now notice how it says remember that, but remember that is that part is blue, right? So if we want to make that part blue, we have to wrap this in another special tag so that we can reference that in CSS. And the tag for something like that, that's pretty generic just for doing something like that, it's called a span tag. So span, we open that up. What am I doing? I'm messing my, I have sausage fingers over here. We're gonna take span and then just put that in there. Now, if we hit save, nothing changes it, but in CSS, we will be able to colorize that to that special blue color. All right, so now we have that. What is next in our design? And we're looking top down, left to right. Next up is this little section. It's a little menu, and we have two of them, as you can see. So in order to create a navigation, this is where we use one of those semantic tags, all right? So basically semantic means you should use the appropriate tag based on what is occurring, contextually in that area of your HTML. because you could completely style all this stuff using div tags, but it makes more sense to use these special tags in areas that make sense. So for instance, nav, we type nav and hit enter. We're going to open this whole area up and define this area as an important navigation on our website. So inside of here, we're going to have our two different, where is it at? Our two different navigations. We have one that's kind of centered over here. This is like the important stuff. And then we have a contact, and then we have what's called a call to action here. We're going to style those using two different navigations. And when it comes to HTML, there's different types of navigations. There's an unordered list, and there's an ordered list that we can use. We're going to use an unordered list. An ordered list would put little numbers next to each item. We don't need numbers next to our navigation items. So we're going to use unordered list. Short is UL. Again, if you want to learn more, go to W3 Schools, type in UL. You'll see how, through the examples and all that stuff and how it all works. In an unordered list, you open up the UL tags, and inside of them, we put each of our list items. This is a list item, that's a list item, that's a list item. This right here is if I take this right here, you'll see this is our unordered list right here, which contains all three of those. We're going to have another unordered list over here with two list items over there. So our list item is defined by typing li, and then because we want ours to be clickable, these are going to be links that take people to different areas of the site. That's a navigation. We put in an A tag as well inside of there. And we're not going to have it go anywhere, so we're just going to use that hash sign. And then we're going to put in the anchor text right here, home. All right, so if we save this, we can now see this little bullet point, and it says home. Now, real quick, in Visual Studio Code, you can replicate lines of code by holding Shift, Alt, down arrow key. And we'll do that twice. So there's a lot of ways to really save yourself time when you're writing HTML, when you're working within Visual Studio Code. The next one is going to be features, and then this one is going to be called pricing. So now if we save, we'll see all three show up. Of course, they're butt ugly. So don't worry. When we get to the CSS portion, we're going to make that all look better. All right. Now we also need a way, if we come back over here to our document, notice how this one's bold. These ones aren't. Well, this one's bold because this is the home page we're designing, and it's a visual indicator telling people that this is the page that you're currently at. Well, we have to have a way to communicate that to the CSS in order to make it bold. So we'll add a class, just like we did before, and we'll just call this current, as in the current page. Nothing changes here though, because this is all just for CSS purpose. In CSS, when we get to this portion, we'll be able to reference this current class and then make this right here bold. Okay. So next up, we're going to copy all 5 of those lines with Control C, and then hit Control V on your keyboard to paste underneath it. Now this is an area where we also want to add, I forgot to add a class on this unordered list. So this is going to be class primary-nav. And then this one as well would be class, we'll call this one secondary nav. And the reason I'm adding a class onto each one of these is because we need a way to differentiate between the two of these. And adding a class is one such way to do that. So now we've basically given this its own label called primary nav and then secondary nav. And the reason we need to be able to differentiate between two of those is because this one's stuck over here, and then this one's going to be right aligned over here. And we do that through CSS. So let's go ahead and modify the stuff in here because it's changed. So this one right here has to be contact, and we don't need this class of current because that one won't ever be bold. And then we also have Go Premium, which is that call to action. We'll go ahead and get rid of this third one. And then we're going to give this one a class because it's a really specially designed button. So we're going to call it Go Premium -CTA. And we'll hit save because that design, it's this button right here. So we have a lot of CSS work to make it go from this blank boring link to this link. All right. There's a couple other things that we also need to account for in our HTML when it concerns this navigation. When it's on a mobile view or a tablet or whatever, you have what's called a hamburger menu. Notice we don't see these links anymore. Why? Because we don't have the physical space, the horizontal space, to put them all. It would be cluttered. That's why you have this little menu. And so when you tap on it, it presents that navigation in a different way. So we need to account for this element, all right? So that means this is a graphic file that you can, once selected, go to export, export selected. We want to choose SVG for this case. SVG is a scalable vector graphic. It's a type of graphic where it never loses quality. If you take a real small like JPG image or a photograph and then you try to scale it up real large, you'll see pixelation, it'll look blurry and whatever. That's not what we want for this element because it was created within a design application. And so then we can export this into a folder where we're going to be able to access and reference from both our HTML and our CSS. So if I hit change here, I'm going to go back to my code folders. We're going to go into one we're working in. We're going to create a new file, or a new folder rather, called, you could call it assets or images. I'm going to call this one images, and hit select folder and then export. Now, if we go back to our code editor, hit Control B, we'll see we have this images folder that we just created with this name right here. If I right click and rename that, we're just going to name that here to menu.svg. All right. Now, SVG is actually a code-based graphics format right here. So that's something to get into the future. But Adobe Experience Design, which is that app that I keep switching back to that I use to design the user interface, it will automatically create this code for you based on the graphics that you create in that app. Adobe Illustrator and other vector applications work the same way, at least the ones that allow you to export SVG files. Okay, so we need to put in an HTML element that accounts for showing that just on mobile, that little hamburger menu. And we're going to put it right here, just outside of the navigation tag. And so this is an image, so we use an image tag like that, img, hit enter. And the source is, wherever that image resides in your project folder structure. So in our case, it's inside of a images folder / then we put the name menu.svg. Now, when it comes to images, you should always use the alt attribute, or specify it rather. And basically, it's just a short description of what this thing is. And this is good for accessibility, meaning people who have screen readers, who have like vision issues or impairment issues, they'll be able to actually navigate around. It will tell them what this is because clearly they can't see this graphic, correct? Correct. All right, so this, we're just gonna put in open navigation. All right. Okay, so now we also wanna add a class onto this one, and we're gonna call this mobile-menu. And then we're going to save it. Additionally, we have another one, another element or an attribute that you haven't used yet, and it's called the ID. ID equals, we're going to call this one mobile-cta. Now, the ID class is useful when you get to JavaScript. Now, we talked about HTML a little bit. We really haven't talked about CSS, but you have another one that, and when all three of these things work together, called JavaScript. Because, let me describe what's happening. So because when somebody on mobile needs to click on this in order to access the menu, we have to have some sort of intelligent coding that tells the CSS, or tells the browser rather, to apply a CSS class, to attach a class that will toggle and show our navigation or these menu items right here. In order to do that, you can't do that strictly with just HTML. So we're going to use something called JavaScript to do that. And the way we reference it, or we find it, or one of the ways at least, is by giving it an ID. And an ID is one of those elements or is attributes that cannot be used more than once in your document. So this mobile-CTA should not ever be used on another element that has the same thing. When it comes to classes, you can actually apply the same class. For instance, like mobile menu, we could put this right here. So the class attribute accepts multiple class names, and we'll get into that as well. So we have that element done. We also are going to need another element that we're going to put right here, just above the first primary nav, and that's going to be a little X icon. Because when that mobile navigation opens up, it's going to have a little exit sign for people to close that navigation. And so if I come back over here, you'll see I had this little X right here. It's actually hard to see because it's white, but the navigation that we come out, I didn't design for it in this application so you don't see it. It's going to be this little nav drawer that comes out like this and overlays on top of the screen, and it's going to be like this dark blue. And then this will be like right around here. At this point, I'm not going to bother exporting any further graphics because I already did that. I'm simply going to export those, or I'm going to import those all into the existing images folder. Now, I will have the zip file that you can download that has all this stuff ready for you as well. All right, so now you can see all the images that we're going to be using in order to pull off this project right here. All right. So next up, like I mentioned, we have to put in that reference. Again, it's exit.svg. And again, that's going to be another image tag. All right. So for that, we're going to have an image. The source is going to be images/exit.svg. It's also going to have an ID and class as well. So let me hit Control B to get rid of that sidebar. We're going to paste that in here. So again, they can't have the same ID, that's for certain. So this is going to be mobile-exit because it's an exit button, and that's what I'm choosing to name it. Our class is going to be mobile menu exit. All right. And then our alt, we'll just put close navigation. Great. All right. And that is all. That is it. That's everything that we need for our navigation. So you can see we have, it looks like a complete mess. And it is. At this point, it's supposed to look like a complete mess because we haven't applied any CSS. But this is what raw HTML looks like. It's horrible. All right. So next up, notice all these closing div tags that we've ended up with. Well, that's what happens very quickly when you're writing HTML. So next up, we're going to come outside of all these closing tags. Notice all these lines that point to each other. Well, this is just a visual indicator showing you where this opening tag's closing tag is associated. So you can see this one right here is the closing tag for our nav bar. And that basically contains all this stuff. All right, we're going to come outside of that now. And the reason we're doing that is because we can see, if we go back over here, everything over here was self-contained into this section. So now we have this big section right here. And we have two columns, like one right here and then another one right here. So that's a block and then that's a block. And each of them have stuff inside of them, right? So let's get to that. So when it comes to certain parts of your design, it makes sense to use another tag that is semantic called section. So this is just a section of content. All right. We're also going to give this, because we're going to have multiple sections, a class so that we can reference it specifically called hero. This area over here in UI design is typically called the hero section. It's what's just underneath the navigation traditionally. And it's what usually will be the first thing that a person will see, because it usually has big text, like a big headline, a subheadline, a call to action button of some sort, an illustration, a photograph, or whatever. So it's a really important part of your design. Inside of here, again, we're going to have another one of those annoying container tags, because we need a way to have a block that goes right here. And it's the same one, the container tag. It's a div element. You'll see how it works, but we have to add that first before we can then add these inside of it. So we're going to put our container And then inside of here, we're going to create that first block for the left column. So I'm just going to call this hyphen left call for column. And then we're going to put in that subheadline. All right, so we're going to use a paragraph for that, a paragraph tag. All right, and it's also going to have a class inside of it called subhead. And that way, I mean subheading, that way we can reference it and style it with CSS. It's nitty, and whenever you want to put an ampersand sign, you can't just put the ampersand, you have to put ampersand, amp, and semicolon. I know it's very weird, it's strange, but that's just how it renders it. So when we hit save, we can see it shows up there, and it just shows the ampersand. Notice how it's also styled very differently, and it's title case and not all uppercase. We can make it all uppercase when we get to the CSS portion and make it gray and all of that. Next up is the headline, and we use that through what's called an H1 tag or a heading tag. So there's 6 heading tags, and the most important ones are the lowest numbers. So the most important headline tag is the H1, and that's where usually you put inside of the hero section. You know, the big old headline that you want. A task app that doesn't stink. Save that. All right, we can see, notice how it's naturally bigger, the browser knows. And we can style that, you know, and make it our own size however we wish. Inside of here, we're also going to have a class of hero-cta. All right, and we're inside of here. And the reason I'm putting that class here, or that div, is because right here, we have 2 elements side by side, this button and then this button. So we're going to have a parent element that will allow us to create that sort of 2-column layout. Then inside of there, we have the big call to action. We're going to use an A with a class. So if I put a period class, or not class, but the class name, like primary CTA for call to action, then it creates all this HTML for me. So that's an emit abbreviation thing. It's not going to go anywhere, this particular link, all right? So we're just going to give it the hash sign. And then our class name, or the anchor text rather, is going to be try for free. So now we can see it if we save it. We're going to hit Shift-Alt down on the arrow on the keyboard just to replicate that line. And this one's class is going to be watch video CTA. And this time we're going to open it up because we're going to have a line here with an image element, because the image is going to be for this element right here. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so the image location for that is, of course, it's in images /watch.svg. The alt is going to be the text, you know, this is watch a video, and then watch a video for the actual anchor text right here. So right there, it looks really ugly, but don't worry. Like I said many times so far, we'll make it better in CSS. So that's all the, or that's not all the HTML yet. We still have, let's see here, our illustration, this big thing over here. This is an SVG graphic itself, which is in the images folder. So we have left call. By the way, notice these little vertical lines. That's kind of there to let you know where the closing tag of these elements are. So this closing tag's right there. All right, so just outside of that left column, we're going to put an image tag. All right, and the source is going to be images illustration.svg. We need to reference it and style it with CSS later on. So we're going to call this hero-image. And then our alt is going to be just like illustration or something like that. Now we're done. All of this section content right here is responsible for all of this right here. Next up, we have another section. So we're going to use the section tag again to define the beginning of this right here. So let's do that. Section, it's going to have its own class of features section. We're going to have that same container class inside of it. Then we're going to have an unordered list, which is responsible for all this right here. This is an unordered list. Notice there's little check mark graphics next to them. We don't have to use to create markup for that in HTML in order to show those. We can do that in CSS, and I'll show you that later. So list item. And here's a tip. If you have like a bunch of these list items, just hit Shift Alt down after you do the first one, leave it empty. Hit your down arrow key for as many times as you need it, and then you can just start specifying all the type. On my reference monitor, I already have this code typed out, so it's right here. And if you want to paste those too, you can go to the Codepen link in the YouTube description and just grab the code from there. And then also, finally, we do have an image, a photograph of a person holding a phone. And I'll show you that in a second. So holding phone.jpg, the alt is going to be man holding phone. And that's all we need for, now notice how large this is. Don't worry, we'll fix that when the time comes. So you may be wondering, how are we going to define like this little block right here and this little graphic? We're going to do that solely through CSS, and I'll show you how when we get to the CSS section. Next section is this little testimonial section right there. So again, that's going to be another section. And the class is testimonials-section. All right, and inside of here, again, we're going to do the container. You'll see how important the container is later, even if you're confused as to why we're adding it. Unordered list, again, those 3 cards we can create and define as unordered list item. This is a list item, this is a list item, and so is that. So we're going to have list item, open that up. We're going to have the first, there's 3 different things inside of each one. There's a person, and then there's the quote, and then there's their name. So the person, image, source is images, person.jpg. That's one of the files that we have. Alt is just, I'm just going to say person. You can probably put their name if you knew it. Block quote is a tag that makes sense if you have a quote of some sort. So for this one, I'm just going to put in and paste off the side of my screen some lorem ipsum filler text, which is just Latin. It's just an industry standard for front-end developers and UI designers to use if they don't have the copy, the real copy yet, the ad copy. And then we're going to have another tag you haven't used, site, and we're just going to put Jane Doe. And that's basically who said the quote. Now we're going to take all those 5 lines, copy them, Control-C, come down underneath it, Control-V, and then hit Enter, Control-V. Now we have 3 of them. And the images are really huge, and we'll fix that with CSS. Don't worry. And then finally, we have one more section, and that is our contact section, which resides down here. There's 2 columns. We have some form elements. We have labels, a form element, a label, form element, and then a submit button. And then we have, in this column, a Google Maps view, and we'll get that embedded as well. And then we'll be finished with the HTML process. So, section with a class of contact section. And then our container, this is the one we're adding all the time. Contact left. So we don't have, when it comes to the div tag and Emmet abbreviations, you don't have to put div and then like contact, all right, wait. Yeah, contact left. Because div tag is used so much, you could just put in period, contact left. Hit enter, and it knows it'll be a div. So that's just a quick tip. All right, so we have our title of contact. We're going to use an H2 element, not an H1 this time, because it's like a heading. We're going to have a form right here. Now, when it comes to the form tag, you don't have to really use it. It depends on the technology that's used to communicate the data that's inputted into the form. But we're just going to leave it there and use it anyways. It has no styling associated with it, so you can't see it in the browser. So now next up is the name. And we're going to use a label element, and notice it says a for attribute. So we're going to put name, because this is the name. You can name it whatever you want, by the way. And we have to put name right there. So we'll see right there, we have contact, and then it says name right there. I'll describe what the for is in a second. We're going to put an input. Type is text, because it's a text field that somebody types into. We're also going to give it an ID of name and a class of, or a name of name rather. Name is an attribute that you would use to communicate whatever is inputted with a server, but that's not our job. So anyways, for name, ID name. So whatever for is bound to has to be bound to the ID of whichever element you want this label to be associated with. So the reason we do that is because if we click right here on the name element, it will automatically highlight and allow you to type into this text field right here. If you change this to like name2, guess what? It doesn't happen. So those two need to be bound to each other with using the same value. Outside of that, we're also going to put the second one. We only have two. I should have put in an email because usually you have your name, your email, that a way for them to contact you. But I forgot. Anyways, you would just copy this and update those values accordingly. Let me show you just real quick how you would do that if you wanted to. You just copy those two, paste them, email. You would change this to email. Change that to email and change that to email. All right, so now we have an email. Oh, and by the way, there's a type of email, an email field. And when you do that, and if you enter in like a wrong email type, it will provide form validation, like saying that you didn't structure your email address correctly, like you didn't use an @ sign or something. But anyhow, because I didn't include it in my design, I'm not going to include it here. We do have this final element, which is a text area, because it's a big type of text field. It's unlike this one because it has multi lines and such. So we still use a label. 4 is going to be message. Name is message. And then we type in text area. The name is going to be message. ID will be message because it has to be bound to the 4 value. And that's it. You can also actually type stuff between the tags of text area and it'll show up right in the middle, but I don't want that to happen right there. There's also something called the placeholder value. So if on our input field, if we type placeholder, your name, you'll see it shows like this little dimmed out your name thing. And then once you click in it and start typing, it goes away. For this context, this use case, you don't need that because name is obvious. It's obvious how to enter that information. All right, so you can do the same thing, by the way, with the text area. You can put a placeholder value there. Finally, we need our button send message. All right, so to do that, we don't use a link. You could, depending on the technology it's used to communicate the information, but we can put input, type is going to be submit. All right, and then we put class, because we're gonna need to style this, send message, not second. What am I thinking? Send message CTA, value equals send message. Why do I type in second? I keep on typing second instead of send. I don't know. Second, send message rather. Save, and there it is. There's our send message button. Nothing happens except it just kind of submits to itself. But yeah, that is it. And then finally, we have the map. So for our map, I'm gonna put the map, let's see, right here, right after this contact left, right here. And we're gonna have a contact right. And we're going to embed a Google map in there. So if I get up a new browser, go to maps.google. We're gonna go to Beverly Hills 90210. The old school showed, that's how old I am, although I never watched it, I'll be honest. Maybe I watched it a few times. Okay, no, I'm a diehard fan. I watch it every night. We're gonna click on share and then embed a map and then copy this or copy HTML right there. Once we're done with that, we can paste it right there. And then guess what? We save it. And ta-da, it works automatically. Isn't that cool? So it's an iframe, which means it allows you to embed a web page, another web page into your web page. It's very crazy. And then now, that's it. That is all of our HTML, believe it or not. I mean, it's actually a lot. But now we're gonna make all this good looking during the CSS. Whoa, that guy's like right in my face. During the CSS portion. All right, so now it's time for the CSS, but I'm looking over here in our XD document. So when it comes to writing CSS, the way that pretty much all CSS pros do is through what's called mobile first CSS. This means that all the CSS we write, we want to make sure it looks good on a mobile design or a mobile format first. So that's why we're going to be looking at the mobile design for this. The reason you do mobile first and not desktop first is because mobile first is generally more simple. A design for mobile first is, it doesn't include as much. Like look at this section here. We don't have the photograph. We don't have this stuff. So our CSS will tend to be smaller in size. And then we use what's called media queries, which we'll get into and I will explain. And those media queries will allow us, based on certain widths or viewport widths, to define all this extra special stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and get started making this ugly thing over here look like this. It's magic, almost. No, it's not magic. Okay, so let's get Control B. We're gonna click on our SAS file here, and we're gonna hit Control B again to close that out. And notice this little icon up here. We can split this editor. This means that on the left, we can see our CS or our HTML if we want to, and then on the right, we can have our CSS. Now, normally I would do that. Some people actually has multiple monitors, and they'll do, you know, one's there on one monitor and the other one's on the other monitor. But this is a way to do it within a single monitor, because when you're writing CSS, you're kind of always referring back to your HTML markup, because that kind of guides your decisions over here in terms of your what are called selectors. I'm not going to do that though, because I have everything enlarged up, and it's just I don't have a lot of space to work with. So I will be manually clicking back and forth up top, going back and forth like that. All right, so when it comes to your CSS, the first element that you can style, and you don't have to like style it at the first time, or I'll show you what I mean, is the body tag. So the body tag is where you define like the background of the website. So if it's in body, we can give it a background color, and there is a specific background color that I'm using that isn't white. By default, it's white in HTML in the browser, as you can see, but this is kind of like a gray, a very light gray. So I'm gonna click over here, copy this hex color code. All right, that's called a hex value. And we're going to say background, and then colon, and then paste that in, and then hit a semicolon and hit save. Now you could see it's that color. We could, in Visual Studio Code, if you hover over that value, then it gives us this color picker. And so notice the hex value, all those crazy numbers, is how we're able to communicate the color to the browser. So if we say this is red, guess what? And hit save, it changes it to red and makes it look really ugly. So let's go back, Control Z. There we go, it's F2, F2, F2. And so this is what a CSS rule set looks like. Here's what it consists of. Let me hit Control Plus here to make this bigger a few times. It is, first we have what's called a selector. The selector can be a variety of things. But primarily, it can be two different things. It can be the name of the HTML element itself, like body, div, img, nav, or it can also be like a class. All right, so class equals navbar, container. So that's just called a selector. You can also have multiple selectors, like separated by comma, like body, and then maybe something like nav. And the reason you might have multiple selectors is because they might be styled with the same exact properties, okay? So now inside of this, we open this up in order to specify our CSS properties. So we have this little squiggly brace right here, or bracket, and then it closes right here at the end. You're always going to have that sort of situation when you're working with CSS or SAS. Then we have the actual property name. Background is a CSS property name. Then after the property name, you put a semicolon right here to denote that's the end of the name. And then you'll also denote that this is the beginning of the associated value. So in the case of background, we have a hex value right here. All right. And then you end it with a semicolon. And if you want to have multiple properties, which we will in this case, we put in a second line, the same format, property, value, this will be margin, and then a colon, and then the property. We're going to put 0, and then we end the statement with a semicolon, just like we did up there. Margin 0, by default, browsers add a little bit of margin. It's called margin. It's white space on the edge. I always just remove that, and I add my own. I just kind of reset it to 0 in the body tag and hit save. So now notice how it kind of just fell back up there. Then we're going to have another one. We can put font family. All right, I'm going to use something called Poppins. Now, when I save that, you can see that the font changed from like that Times New Roman serif font to this. And the reason it worked is because I already have Poppins installed on my machine. Now, not everybody has the same font, especially if you're using, you know, a different font as you. So I had to download and install that. For that use case, we're going to go to fonts.google.com. And Poppins is a font that is available here at google.com. So if I type in Poppins, here it is. We can select a style. So like how many weights do we want to have? Like there's a lot of different bold, you know, variations of this font. One thing to note, the more variations that you have, the longer it will take to load because the browser has to, or your phone or whatever has to download this information. So we can stick with like a regular, and we can also click on a bold, like bold 700 right here. So now we click on import, and then we copy this right there. Not sure if you can see that, but it's just 3 lines starting at import. Then we paste it up there. I'm hitting Control- on my keyboard to get us back down to scale. And then we can exit out. Now, this way, if you don't have it installed on your machine, you don't need to, because guess what? Your browser will download it based on this information right there. All right. So next up, we're going to start writing out our core CSS, CSS. And we have to ask it. You have to ask yourself, in the same way, like when we started writing HTML, we started to look at, you know, the top of our design document to guide our decisions for HTML. We're going to do the same thing with CSS. We're going to look over here to see what's happening first, and we're going to style those accordingly. Now, it doesn't really matter the order of your CSS rule sets. It doesn't matter at all, but it does kind of make sense for organizational purposes to have all your rule sets kind of cascade the way that it's occurring here. So we have our navbar class or a div element, and that's in relation to this big white container right here. So we're going to reference our class of navbar like this, period navbar. So that basically means the period means it's a class, and navbar is the name. So any properties that we open up here and we specify, they're going to be specific to this element or any other element that has class of navbar. Okay. So looking at our code up here, we need to get this right here, this whole section right here, looking like this, because we're doing mobile first. Just the logo and just this little hamburger menu. All right. So for navbar, the first thing we're going to set is the background. The background is going to be white. So you can enter in multiple different types of, there's different ways in order to specify color in CSS. You can do hex values, you can do what's RGB, RGBA, HSL. There's a lot of different ways. I don't want to, confuse you too much, but you can also write out common color names as well. So now you can see it's just this white color, and you can see the difference between the shades here. So background white, and we're going to also have padding. So padding is another CSS value. By the way, if we type in CSS in Google, we'll see W3 Schools. There's a whole CSS section on W3 Schools as well. Tremendously popular site. It's 186th largest website in the world. So it's a very popular site. And again, when it comes to all these CSS properties, of which there are many, you can go here and refer to see exactly how they're used. Okay. So same thing with HTML. So we're going to have padding. All right. So what padding is very similar to margin. So margin affects everything outside of that element. So when you add margin, like in certain values, like for instance, if I change this to like 5 M units, look how, wow, it looks like it broke something here. There we go. Look how much margin it added there. Or if we change this to 2, we have a little bit less. So it affects everything outside. Now, if we did padding, padding's the opposite of margin because padding affects everything that's on the inside of an element. So let me demonstrate this. Let's put this back to 0. And don't worry, I'll describe what that M thing unit is in a little bit. But we're going to put here a padding of 1 M unit. Notice how it pushed everything away. So padding works on the inside, whereas margin works on the outside. Let me bring up the developer tools, Control-Shift-I. And we're going to click this little button where it says select an element when you hover over it. Notice when we hover over it, it's showing us all this stuff. So when we hover over the navbar element right here, and it shows you right here, there's like a little thing that says div.navbar underneath where I'm hovering. It's like right by my mouse right now. It shows you this green outline right here. That is the padding value, and it's on the inside. So notice if we hover over here, like it's nitty and gritty, we have these borders on the top that are orange and bottom that are orange. That's margin, and that's default margin that the browser has added onto this element. So notice it's on the outside of the element, but this padding is on the inside. So that's important to understand. You're going to be using that value, those properties of padding and margin big time. So that's why I'm spending a little bit of time talking about it. So we have that set to 1 M unit. By the way, my browser is all the way up to 175. It should be this size right here. And so that gives us a little bit of that padding, that white space, because when it comes to UI design, you don't want things slapped up against edges and stuff like that. This looks bad. So that's why we add padding right there. All right. So now another thing we need to do is to style up this logo. This looks nothing like this. So let's make it look like that. Now, remember when I was talking about Sass and it has some superpowers that you can use that you don't, that regular CSS can't do? Well, regular CSS can't nest rule sets inside of each other. But that's what Sass allows us to do. So let me show you how you do that. You just put logo. And this works because logo is a child element of navbar. So if you look in our HTML, you'll see that we have our navbar, and then we have our logo. And by the way, I forgot to add the class equals logo. That way we can reference it. So because that exists in there, we can put that rule set right there. So the first property value that we're going to use is text decoration. We're going to say none. This will get rid of the underline when we save it. See, it just got rid of it. Let me make this a little bit larger though, just so we can all see what's happening. Next up, font weight is going to be bold. So you use the font-weight property to specify whether or not something's bold. You can put in a numeric value like 700. Remember we imported the weight of 400 and 700 right here. So we can do the same thing that way. We're just going to make this bold. We're also going to put in color, black. So whenever you have text color, color is the property you use to change the color of that text. All right. And again, we could hover over this and make it red. And notice Visual Studio Code uses RGB value when you use their little selector to choose colors. What's back up there though, we're just going to make that black. And then we're going to make it a little bit larger, font size, 1.2 EM units. So remember I talked about M units and I would describe what that is. So this is a unit right here, EM. There are different types of units that you can specify on certain CSS property values. There are absolute values and then there are relative values. So this is a relative value and it's pronounced as M right here. And this would be a great use case for showing you if I type in, If you're confused about, what a unit is or a property is, just go to Google, type in CSS and then whatever it is. And then we can see in this section, CSS units. So it has a whole section on what are called units. All right. So notice it's talking about the PX, which is for a pixel, which is absolute right here. It's going to show you all the absolute types of units that you can put in. You can put cm, mm, in, blah, blah, blah. You can use relative as well. Notice M is right here. It's relative to the font size of the element. Font size, rather. You can use EX. There's a lot of other ones that you can use, but I don't want to, bore you too much with that. But these are all things that you can research even further. Like if you want to know more about M, just type CSS M unit, and you're going to get a lot of different values that will help you give a better understanding of how all this stuff works. So the larger the value number here, like 4, the bigger this becomes. All right. So next up, remember how we had that span element because we need to make this blue? We can put span and have another nested rule set and put color and then put the color of that blue color. It's not blue. It's actually a different shade. And if I double click into here, we'll get that color code right there and paste it in, and there we go. Now I'm going to introduce you to something that's very cool about CSS. This color shows up multiple times throughout our document. It's a part of our what's called the color scheme. And this color is here, it's here, it's in multiple areas. What if, for instance, you guys decide, whoever you work with on your team, that you want to change the primary color of your color scheme? Maybe you're rebranding. Well, if you put it in here and it's showing up in all these different areas throughout your CSS, well, you're going to have to replace those all manually. Well, we can use what's called a custom property in CSS. And it's not just for Sass. It used to be, Sass used to have variables, and it still does, and you can still use them. But CSS natively in the browser didn't have anything like that. But it does now, and it has for a couple years, and they're called custom properties. Here's how you do it. So any type of property value and any type of property value that's reused often throughout your document, you can define up here inside a :root, and then you can specify these CSS properties. So the property name is first denoted by having 2 hyphens or 2 dashes, and then the name of it. We're going to call this primary -color, and then we put in the value. All right, so then the way we specify this, we put var for variable. We open up in parentheses. Sorry, I've been talking so much, I'm not very fluent right now. And then we put dash dash, and we reference the name of the variable that we want to use, or the property. And then we hit save. Notice we hit save, it still works. So now if we ever want to change this value, we only have to change it in one area of the document up here, rather than having to do it in a bunch of different areas if we have it hard-coded in certain areas. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so now we have this area up here looking pretty good. We have an issue where this is a little bit too close. It has to be right aligned to the container. We also have to get rid of this. We're going to hide that by default. So to do that, we're going to hide that. We're going to look at here and notice all of our stuff, our navigations, are included and nested inside of this nav tag. So we're going to come outside of this nav bar and just put nav. And we're going to put display none. That hides it. Look at that. So we're getting somewhere. Exciting stuff. So now we're going to take our container. Now notice we have our nav bar, then we have our container. And we're going to reference this container in order to separate this logo from this graphic right here. This little hamburger menu needs to be over here. So what I'm going to do is say container, display, flex. Now notice this says none, this says flex. Flexbox, flex is short for flexbox, and it's a certain way to structure layouts. There's also the grid. There's also a couple other property values for display that you can use based on your needs. So we're going to put display flex and then place content space hyphen between. When we do that, it moves this over. So if you want to learn more about Flexbox, there are entire courses on learning CSS Flexbox and tutorials, of course. So I'm not going to get into that because it would just make this extremely long. This is a crash course, so we have to move along. So now that we have those separated, notice when we hover over with our mouse button, usually you wouldn't use this, like most people who are on a desktop wouldn't have their screen like this, but some might. And it's nice to have a little visual indicator that you're hovering over it where your cursor pointer changes to a little hand icon. So what we can do is we can say, oh, and by the way, I messed up. These two elements should be nested inside the navbar element. There we go. So now we're going to save. Okay, that makes more sense. Now, so now what we're going to do is we're going to say mobile menu, and we're going to put cursor pointer. Mobile menu is in relation to this class right here. That's the menu graphic, and that's responsible for this person right there, or that guy, or that thing, that graphic. So if we save, guess what? It changes to a hand. All right, now we basically, for mobile, have this part done for now. Next up, look how ugly this stuff is. That right here looks nothing like, here, let me get this situated so that we can see both side by side. It looks nothing like this, right? This and this. So we got to get that looking much better. All right, so now let's come back to our SAS here. We're going to style all of our links a certain way, a certain color rather. So if I, for instance, where it says watch a video, right here, this isn't black. It's actually kind of like a dark gray. So if I wanted to change all the hyperlinks, which by default are either blue or this visited color that's like this purple, we're gonna go ahead and just reference all A elements. So we're not gonna use a class, and we're gonna do color, and then change it. So notice how they all change. Any link that shows up anywhere else is gonna be that color now. If I only wanted to change the color of a specific link, I would use a class instead as a selector. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, next up, we're going to do, let's see here. We're gonna do some other general cleanup work. It doesn't necessarily follow the flow of what's happening sequentially here. But I like to include some of this stuff like near the top of the document. So we're gonna reference all unordered lists. Remember, we used quite a few unordered lists. In my design, none of them have bullet points though. But the default behavior and design and presentation of of unordered lists in the browser is to add little bullet points next to them. So I'm gonna get rid of all those by referencing the UL, and we put list style type none. Notice how they all went away. I'm also gonna get rid of any default margin and padding that has been added on behalf of the browser. And we know they've been added because if we go to Control-Shift-I, we click on this and we hover over here, we can see both padding is added in the green section on the left. So there's padding left added, and there's also a margin on the top and bottom. I'm going to get rid of both of those by default. So margin 0, padding 0. So notice how it gets moved right up against the edge of the browser. It looks ugly, but don't worry, we're gonna style all this stuff to make it look a lot better. Also, our sections. Section appears multiple times. Section here, section there, section there. And I'm gonna add some specific rule sets to that. Specific properties rather. We're gonna do padding. Padding is cool because you can put like 5 em units, and that will affect the padding on the top, bottom, right, and left. But if you want to control specifically where it goes, like if you want to have the top and bottom be a certain value and the left and right be a different value, you put 5 em units on the top and bottom and 2 em units on the right and left. You can take it a step further and specify all 4. So if you wanted like all 4 to be different, you would put top would be 5M, right, it works like a clock, by the way, would be 8 M units, maybe bottom might be 10 M units, and then left would be like 20 pixels. So you can also mix your units. But for me, it's just gonna be 5 M units on the top and bottom, 2 M units on the right and left. Now that 2 M units on the right and left makes it so that we have white space on the left portion of the browser, and now no longer is our content being pushed against on the edge. All right. Also, let's get to this part. What's different about this compared to this in terms of alignment? Well, this is centered. All this text is centered. So, oops, I didn't want to do that. Let me close that out. I got the wrong one. There we go. So what we'll do is we see which selector we want to use in order to take all this text and make it centered. So if I come down here, there's our hero section. Here's our text. We could probably say left call, make that all centered. Or we can come up and just choose hero, and it'll make everything centered that it can. So hero, that's the class, text align, center. There it goes. Look at that. We're getting somewhere. I'm telling you, it's looking a lot better. Now we need to still work with this because this still does not look like this. There's some differences, right? Like this is different and this button's a lot different. So let's do that. Left call, because that's a class defined right here, and that's responsible for all this stuff right here. So we have our subhead inside of there. So we're going to do subhead. And by the way, you can do this nesting of sorts and not even specify a property value if you don't want to. We can put in text transform uppercase. All right, because this was transformed to uppercase. Font weight's going to be bold. Save it. Color is going to be gray. Now we're getting closer. Letter spacing is going to be 0.3 M units. So now, look how close that looks to this. Very, very good. Next up, this has to be larger. A headline or H1 element right here. So we're going to put H1, font size 2.5 M units. And how do I know that it's 2.5? I experiment. So before I recorded this tutorial, I recreated all this already. That way you're not sitting there watching me bumble over my words and my properties and all that stuff. Because even if somebody who's seasoned with HTML and CSS, like myself, it's not always this easy. So nobody wants to sit there watching me trying to figure this out from scratch. Although I'm sure that would be a good use case. Some people would want to see. But just for making this course faster and so that I can focus on teaching rather than other stuff, I did the project beforehand. I know some people, they don't like that for some reason, but trust me, everybody does it and there's a reason. All right, so line height, 1.3, because right now the line height between this text is too far. We're gonna make it a little bit squished up. And then margin top, because the browser does add default margin to the H1 element. We're gonna do 1.2, or we're gonna put 0.2 M units to get it closer to that subhead. See that? Awesome. Next up, let's style this button. Try for free. Looks nothing like this try for free button, right? So how do we reference this button? Well, we can come back to our index.html. We can find try for free. There it is. The class is primary CTA. So we put dot primary CTA. And this is going to be quite a few properties to achieve this design. So the first one's going to be background, because we have to make it a blue color. Just to show you again, this is what it looks like. All right. So background is going to be var primary color because it's the same color that we were using. So this is the first time we've reused this same color. So now let me just show you the power of the properties, custom properties. If I change this to green, they change in both areas. So it makes your life so much easier. All right, so background, we got that set. We're gonna take color white. Remember, it's text in there and we want that to be white. So we save it and it changes white, as you can see. We're going to also do text decoration none. That gets rid of the underline. We need padding. Look how tiny, like there's not a lot of white space inside. Remember, padding is for the inside white space. Padding is gonna be 0.6 em units on the top and bottom and 1.3 em units on the left and right. We're also gonna do font size. We're gonna increase the size a bit to 1.4 em units. We are also going to put in border radius, 5 em units. So notice how the borders by default, the border radius is just a perfect like 90-degree angles. We want it to be a pill shaped like this. So to do that, we put border radius with some large amount and it makes it that. You can also put like 0.5 em units and it'll just round it off slightly. But the greater this is, it'll make this all rounded. All right, next up after that, font weight, we're gonna make bold. And then finally, we're gonna put display inline block. All right, so now that's all the properties that we need for this. So now what we wanna do is we wanna style this thing. These need to be, this icon needs to be down here, as shown right here. So we go back here. This is class watch video CTA. All right, we're gonna display block. That gets it away. We're gonna do margin. And this is another thing you don't know. This is the same thing for padding and margin. You could put margin right here and just, we only want margin on the top though. So we could put 1 em units 000 on the right, left, and bottom. That'll work. But a better way, if you know you only want one direction of margin, is put hyphen top or hyphen right, left, or bottom. So now we just put in 1 em unit. Same thing with padding, by the way. All right, so if I reset my browser down to back to 100%, this is what it looks like. All right, we also have an issue. There's a lack of white space here between here and here, this little camera icon. So we're gonna put image because there's an image right here. We're going to put margin right 0.5 em units. And there we go. Awesome. So now we have this graphic right here. We need it to look more like this. It's smaller and it's pushed further away down. So the class is hero-image. We're going to come out here. We're going to put width. You can put percentage values, which is a relative type unit. And then we're going to put in margin top 3 em units. And there we go. Much, much better. So now if we compare these are almost, these are pretty similar. This could be scaled down a little bit more, this icon probably, a little bit more white space. But really, this is all quite close in terms of appearance. Now, of course, if we drag this out, it's going to look strange. But don't worry, we'll fix that as well and ultimately make the desktop version look like that. But let's continue on. Now we have that section where it has the features right here. So we're going to reference our features section. And we're going to say background. And we have to get a background color. So I already know what that is. It's going to be this value right here. We save it and you can see right there. Now another thing, sometimes if you just have classes as selectors, classes alone, it might be confusing. Sometimes it can help to put the actual HTML element as well. So if we put section right there, that's in reference to the fact that this is a section with a class of hero. So this can help you understand where it's coming from. We're also going to change all the text to white because it's such a dark background and we need that contrast. All right. Now we have to work on this features list because it needs to look like this. All right. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and specify ul.featureslist. So we're going to put, so we have like 5 properties to put. We're going to put margin 0. We're going to, oh, and by the way, definitely make sure you put in, let's see here, there we are. The class is features list because I didn't include that initially. I just added that off screen. So UL is feature list. So margin 0, padding left 0.1 em units. All right, so you can designate top, right, left, bottom for both padding and margin if you just want to specify one. Display grid. Now this part's gonna blow your mind. In fact, you know what? I think we're gonna wait. We're gonna wait for this. Come back to this. Okay, that's a comment. You can just put 2 forward slashes. I'm gonna wait for that. And you'll see what I mean later on. So now that's what we need to do now is space these out further, and obviously make it look more like this. So we're gonna put list item. Font size 1.1 em units just to make it a little bit larger. Margin bottom to space them out from each other more, 1 em unit. Margin left will be 2 em units. And we're moving it over with margin left, as you can see from here to there, because we need to make room for the check mark. The way we can do the check mark is use something new to you. It's called a pseudo selector. So we put and before. The and is something that's only specific to Sass, like working in a SCSS file. It just basically will transpile into before. It'll look like that in your main.css file. All right, so we put and before. Content is going to be empty. Position is absolute. Making an element or a rule set with position absolute is a way to position an element within the document. And then you can use some other values that you'll see in a second. We're going to put width of 20 pixels, height of 20 pixels, and a background image. So if we could put URL. We're going to come out of our CSS folder into the CSS or into the images folder, bullet.svg. And as you can see, if we save it, we can see it, but it's broken, right? Background size, we're going to put contain. So that fixes it being broken out of there because it's containing the image. And then margin right will be 0.5 em units. And then also we're going to put in left -2 em units. Now it's hidden. That's because if we want to position this element, this check mark, relative to the container that it's sitting inside, we have to put position relative on its parent. And there it is. I know that's very confusing. It's more of an intermediate to advanced sort of concept, but bear with me. So that is it for that portion. Now, this photograph doesn't exist in the mobile version, so we have to get rid of it. So all we do is we're going to come out here, features, section, image, display, none. There, we've hidden it. All right, very cool. So next up, we're going to worry about the testimonial section, which is right here. Now, I'm not going to make these like slide like carousel. That's a little bit too advanced. We're just going to make 3 of them like stacked on top of each other. So to do that, we'll take a testimonials -section. Background is going to be var primary color. And let's real quickly get in and fix those large graphics, those large files. I mean, the large image that's showing up. So inside of here, we have image, and we're just going to say width 5 em units, height 5 em units, and that really quickly just fixed things right now. Now we can start working within some other stuff. So our unordered list, I actually forgot we don't need, because we already styled and got rid of the bullet points. I didn't do that in my reference code, so that's why I screwed up. So our list items, they have a darker background color right here. So we say background 006BD6. So we can see that background now. Text align, oops. Center, that centers everything, including the image. Padding will be 2 em on the top and bottom, 1 em on the right and left. Width will be about 80%. Margin was going to be 0 on the top, auto on the right. Having auto on the right and left will allow us to center this element. 5 em on the bottom. There we go. And then we also have a border radius, not an order radius, a border radius of 1 em unit. And that rounds off our edges right here. Our image, we have some other properties. A border of 5 pixels solid. You can also have dashed and dots and all that stuff. 006BD6, the one we used above. Can't see that, but you will in a second. Border radius, we want this to be circular, 50%. That's how you do that, border radius 50%. And then margin top, we want to move it up on top. As you can see in our reference, it's up here, not inside. Negative, you can put negative values, 4.5 em units. So we can put margin top, margin bottom, margin right, and margin left. Now we also have to make our text color white, as that completely does not look good. So testimonial section, we actually have a couple other things that we need to do. Let's see here. Color white. There we go. All right, very cool. Next up is going to be the contact section. So our contact section has an H2 element. We want to make it a little bit bigger. Font size 2 em units. Next up, we have our labels, name and message. These need to be stacked like this. Oops, I never did it. I never designed for that, but they need to be stacked anyhow. So we're going to say label, display block. There you go. Font size will be a little bit bigger, so it enlarges them. Margin bottom, 0.5 em units, just to move it away a little bit. Then we have our input and our text area, which is this element and then this element beneath it, the part that people type in. Width is going to be 100%. And padding will be 0.8 em units on the inside to make it larger. Margin bottom will be 1 em units to push them away from each other. Just a little bit. Border, we don't need to do a border because it's looking decent already. Border radius will be 0.3 em units to round the corners. Oh, border, in order to fix that issue where it made them real dark, border 1 pixel solid. You can also have like dashed and all that. Gray. That's a new. That's the way you colorize it. Obviously, if you make this larger, it'll make it a thicker border. Also, box sizing, border hyphen box. Notice the width of these right now. If we save this, it brings them in. And when it comes to elements that have margin and padding applied to them, when you use like width 100%, it can make them extend out too far and create horizontal scroll bars and such. So that's how you fix that. Next up, our input button right here. We need to style that. So input type equals submit. Yes, that is one way that you can choose a selector. we do have a class, and we could just put class like this, send message. Instead of doing this, we can just do that. But I want to show you other ways to select. So what this is it's the HTML element with brackets designated only to choose attributes of type submit. So isn't that cool? Yes, it is. Background color. Variable primary color. So you can see it turns blue on the right. Color is going to be white. Font weight will be bold. Font size will be font sizey. Oh my, 1.3. I'm trying to type too fast. Border is going to be none. Margin bottom will be 5 units to push that map away. Border radius will be 5 units to make it a pill-shaped container. Display is going to be, let's do inline block. It's too big and large for me, so if we do inline block and then make padding 0.8 units and 2 units, and then take width and say unset, now we have this over here. It's much smaller. Oh, cursor, pointer. Now it changes to a pointer. All right, and then finally, we're just about done. Iframe. It's really big right now. It's creating these horizontal scroll bars for us. So let's just take our iframe, which is the Google embed code, width 100%, height, like we'll do 300 pixels. There we go. Now this is pretty much done for the mobile view, except this doesn't work up here. Like if we click it, nothing happens, right? Well, we need it to show, you know, our navigation. All right, so what we're gonna do now is start focusing on building out our navigation that shows up. So to do that, temporarily, we're gonna come up here and just see where it says nav display none. I'm gonna comment that out. So now it's gonna show it so that we can start styling it the way we want. Now I don't have it designed here the way I want it. You know, I don't have the nav bar designed, so you're just gonna have to trust in my judgment here. There's many different ways to design these things. So what I'm gonna do is put nav menu btn. We're gonna say display block. All right, and then our nav, which contains our unordered list, our two unordered lists, because this is a list and this is a list. We're going to put position fixed because it's going to sit on top of everything, and it's going to come out like to like 66% or 2/3 of the browser and just lay on top of there, and it's going to be a big bar. So position fixed, when we scroll, notice how it stays up on top of here all the time. That's what position fixed, one of the things position fixed does. We're also going to put z-index 999, a really high value. Z-index, when you can place onto elements that have position absolute or position fixed. A really high z-index means it's going to sit on top of everything, because we want this menu to sit on top of everything. Next up is going to be width. We're going to do 66%. We're also going to put right 0, so it's going to push that whole area over there to the right. Top is going to also be 0, meaning it's going to be the very top of the document. Background is going to be our dark color that we used for the features section. So notice now we can start to see it come alive, essentially. Height is going to be 100 viewport height. A VH is another one of those relative units. It just means the height of the device or the browser that you're looking at. Padding, 1 unit on the inside. Next up, we're going to take our UL primary nav, margin top, 5 units. So you're going to see this navigation push down right there. All right, we're not done yet. List item. Now I realize I don't think I actually had any properties there, but we're going to get into the A, and we're going to say color, white, text decoration, none, display block. We have to put display block on A elements or your hyperlink elements if we want to add padding and like margin and stuff. So padding will be 0.5 units. This will increase white space. Font size will be 1.3 em units to make it larger, and then text align will be right. All right, and then also something that's cool, if we hover over these, nothing happens. Sometimes you can change the color on hover and other things. Put and hover. Font weight we can make bold. That's one thing we can change. So look at that. All right, very, very, very cool. All right, this over here, this button, we want to push to the right because it looks a little weird left aligned. So what we'll do is that has a class of mobile menu exit. Float right, we'll push it right. Margin will be like 0.5 em units, and then cursor pointer. So now we hover like that. And that's our mobile navigation. That's what that looks like. So now we're going to go back up to the top and hide this. All right. So now we're going to get into something that's very scary for newcomers, and that is JavaScript. So JavaScript will allow us, when somebody clicks this, to attach a class onto this, what's called a DOM element, or this element right here, or to the nav element rather, and allows us to add a CSS class that will toggle on that display property to show it when it's clicked. So we can put script at the very bottom, just above the closing body tag. And we have to define 3 different properties here. Const, so it's going to be a constant. You can also put let. Mobile, btn. Usually instead of using hyphens, you use camel case. So we're going to mobile btn here in JavaScript equals document dot get element by ID mobile hyphen CTA. This basically allows us to, in the future, reference the button right here, because if we look at it, we have the ID of mobile CTA. That's how we get it in JavaScript. Now we take off the semicolon. We don't have to put const again. We can just define a bunch of them, like nav equals document dot query selector nav. So you use get element by ID for elements that have an ID attribute, or if you just want to select an element name like div or whatever, or label, you can just put the actual element name. So instead of get element ID, it's query selector. There's only one nav, so we just choose nav. Then one more, and that's going to be mobile btn exit. That's going to be that white X button. And it has an ID of mobile exit. So now we put the semicolon at the end, and we have 3 different properties or variables that we can now access. So we say mobile btn. We're going to add an event listener of a click type. There's a bunch of different type of event listeners, like when mouse hover, like when the mouse moves over it or whatever. This is a click, or when somebody taps it. We open this up into here. So this is the first parameter. This is an arrow function. I'm not going to really bother explaining if you're brand new to JavaScript, but basically what this means is when somebody clicks on that button right here, do whatever is inside of these squiggly brackets, okay? So what do we want to happen? Well, we want to take our navigation right here, which is currently hidden with display none, and we want to attach a class that will change it to display block. All right, so to do that, we say nav, which is defined right here, dot class list dot add, because we want to add one, menu hyphen btn. Now menu hyphen btn, I believe we don't yet have defined. Let me see if we do. Control F to find. Yeah, there it is. Nav, we already defined it. Display block. So that's the purpose. JavaScript's going to add that when this gets clicked. So if we hit save, click, there it is. All right, so also what happens when somebody clicks this? We have to hide it, right? So let's just copy these 3 lines. And we're going to change this to mobile btn exit. On click, we're going to basically class list remove. So we click this, it adds it, now it removes it. Look at that. How exciting. All right, so now at this point, this is where we're going to get into responsive CSS design. Right now, this design's not responsive. It only works, it's only made to work and look good and functional on mobile. Because look what happens here. I mean, this does not look good, right? Right. And this doesn't make sense, so we need to make it responsive, all right? So we do that through what's called media queries. We come right to the bottom here. So we have to ask ourselves, and this is helpful to have the dev tools open, Control-Shift-I, because when you have those open and you kind of shrink the browser in, you can see little coordinates up there, like 545 pixels by 1360 or whatever. We're looking at the first value because that's the width value. And we have to ask ourselves, at what point should the design start to change? So at what point, if I'm looking at this nav bar, we're looking at things top bottom now when it comes to responsive design. At what point do we have enough room to show all of those menu items up here, right? So around 768 or something, that's a common breakpoint, but really for this design, that makes sense. We have enough room at this size to hide this menu and then just show all those links automatically for like a tablet or a really large phone. So we're gonna go ahead, the way you do this is through what's called a media query. And here's what it looks like. Let me just copy it and paste it off screen. So it says media only screen and minimum width 768 pixels. So any rule sets, and this is where we put our rule sets inside of here. So any rule sets in here will only apply if it's basically at 768 pixels and larger. So it's really dynamic and flexible. So the first thing we want to do is hide. We want to hide this little hamburger menu because we don't need it at that point. So what we do is say mobile menu and mobile menu exit because we don't need to see the exit button either. Display none. Now when I save it, we don't see it because we're not at 768 pixels. Watch this. There we go. It hides. Here, let's get this back to 100%. There we go. Yeah, it actually hides right there, exactly as we wanted it. So our nav bar container, we're going to put in display grid. Now right now we can't see anything, so maybe I need to add a couple of other things. So our nav bar nav, we're going to say display flex. Now we see it, okay? Now we have some work to do in order to get this fixed up. Let me drag this in so we can see this. So our container is the parent of our nav bar. So if we go up here, we see div class container. Then we see our nav right here. And then inside of a nav, we have this right here and this right here. So we're going to use a display grid and grid template columns. I was showing you the wrong thing. We're working on our container and we're making it a grid container right now, right here. And then we have our logo and then our nav. So two elements. This one's hidden at this media query. So display grid, we have two columns, 180 pixels or so for our logo, and then auto means just take up the rest of the space for the rest of it. All right, so now we end up pushing that over. Then we're going to put justify content unset. Now that's because up here in our container, we had just, oh wait, place content. I think I meant to put place content unset there. Either way, I think we can just remove it, but we'll see. All right, so now we have our nav. We're gonna put justify content space hyphen between. We're also gonna put background none. Now we can't see anything. The position will be unset because it's currently fixed. Height is going to put set to auto because it's currently 100% viewport height. That's why it's all white. And then we're going to put width 100% and padding will be 0. And now we're going to come out and specify the unordered list inside of them. Display flex. Now right now we can't even see what's happening because the text is white. So let's take our links, make color black. There we go. So our colors right here, let me come down here for our links. We're going to do font size 1 em unit, and padding will be 0.1 em unit on a top and bottom and 1 em unit on a right and left. Now right now these are not structured properly at all. Now let me see if the fix was this justify content unset. Okay, it wasn't. Right now they're not situated as they should be, as shown here, because they all need to be looking like this. So let me continue on writing with the information here, or the rule set. So we're going to have ul primary -nav and set the margin to 0. There we go. Now that was the issue. It was pushed down because it was so up high there. Okay, so now, and by the way, we can go back and this still works because all the CSS we're writing now is only for beyond this point. All right, next up, li current a. All right. Oh, let me see what I'm doing here. Yeah, the font weight's going to be bold. And we're also going to put in li go -premium CTA A. And we need this Go Premium button to look like what it does on desktop. Oops, wrong thing. I opened up my Discord right here. So we're going to do color. It's going to be our variable primary color. You can see it's changing up top, up here. We're going to put border of 3 pixels solid var primary color as well. So now we can see what it looks like. Getting there. Font weight will be bold. Border radius will be 5 em units to give it that pill shape. And then margin top will be -0.2 em units. That way it's a little bit situated better. Now what about when we hover it? I think it would be cool to make it inversed in terms of the background color. So and hover, background, var, primary color. Color will be white. So watch this. Ta-da! Isn't that cool? So hopefully you're starting to pick up on stuff. So that's the only thing I really want to change on that resolution. Oh, this I do want to change. Remember I was telling you about the this real cool CSS grid. There's something where it says come back to this. This is where we're going to do this. Right now we have enough room to position these so that they're in 2 columns or more. So the way you do that is by making it a display grid. And we add this very special property. It's very complex. This is definitely a more advanced level thing. We make it a display grid, then we do grid template columns. And we're going to put a repeat function, auto fit, min max 19 rem units, 1 fractional unit right here. So it automatically knows if it doesn't have enough room, keep them all in 1 column. If it has enough room, maybe do 2 and then 3 and then so on. Very, very cool. All right. Next up, we're going to go ahead and focus on the next viewport. And that's going to be around 1080 pixels. So if we go Control-Shift-I, and we drag this out, right around 1080 or so, we have enough room to split this into 2 columns like it shows here. So let's do that. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to copy off screen. Here's a rule set. 1080 pixels. Remember, the other one was above it is 768. Our container, this is where our container, remember we were adding that container element everywhere with the div container? Width will be 1080 pixels, and then the margin will be 0 auto. That basically will center everything. So that, and the reason I do this is when we expand, look how it's all centered. Right at 1080, it stops being fluid, and then it just centers. So that's a way to have a centered container, basically. And then that's applied all down here too. All right, so next up, our section. Let's increase the padding, the white space, through padding. 10 end units on the top and bottom, and 4 on the right and left. Right now, it's like, before this, it was set at, on our section element, 5 and 2. So now let's push that down. Now let's work on this area. So we're going to take our hero and the container inside of it. We're going to say display flex. That gets them situated beside each other. Justify content is going to be space between. All right, not much has changed except they are floating left and right. We want to text align left because right now it's centered. Oops, that's not working. Well, don't worry, we'll get to it. This is supposed to be text align left, and I'm not sure why it is not doing that. Well, let's figure it out and do some debugging, because that's how I figured it would work. Let's get back out here. All right. So this is left call. Container. Let's see. As you can see, we can click on these and we can see all the text align center right here. And text align center right here, but it's not overriding it. So what we could do is we can put in left call. As you can see, it's right here, and it contains all this information. Text. Oh my God. I'm stupid. This happens. Left. Now it's going to make it left. I was wondering, why wasn't it going left? Well, it's because I made it center. I made it, like, what was I thinking? I've been recording far too long. Okay. Let's continue on. All right, what else should change here? The margin of this left column, it's all messed up. So left call, we'll say margin 3 M units on the top, 3 M units on the right, 0 on the bottom, 5 M units on the left. So we can move it in a little bit. We'll take our H1 element, make it larger, font size 3 M units, and width we'll do 90%. All right. Our hero image right here, let's come out after this third closing. Hero-image, width will be 30%. Margin right, we're going to push it away by 8 M units. So now it's looking good. I like it. All right, so now our CTA right here, try for free. This watch a video should be right here. And they're wrapped in a parent container of Hero CTA. So let's reference that. So for that one, let's see here. We're going to put Hero CTA display flex. So now it's right there, but we need to push it away a little bit. So we do primary CTA, which is the big blue button, margin right, 1 M unit. There we go. Then we have our, after that we have our features list right here. And at this point in the actual desktop version, they're all on top of each other. So now we'll take our UL features list, we'll display block. So now it pushes them all there. And we'll say margin left, 5 M units. And then we're going to take our font size or our list item rather, make the font size 1.4 em units just to make them bigger. And before, we have to beef up the size of these because they're too small now in relation to the size of the text. So width from 20 pixels to 30. There we go. Next up, we're going to put in our features. We have this photograph right here. And so I think, yeah, feature section right here. So we're going to reference this by feature section img because the image is inside of the feature section. So we're going to come out here and put features section position relative because we're going to absolutely position the features section image. So, or we could just nest the image inside of here, by the way. So I'm just showing you can do, things multiple ways. Display block. So that's going to show it now. Now notice in the design it's positioned over here to the right. Position absolute. Right is going to be 0. Width will be like 350 pixels. And bottom will be -2 em units. And there we go. All right. Now at this size, this viewport resolution, we don't have enough space to add in these elements because they would overlap. So we're going to do that at a larger viewport in a bit. Next up is this section here. So now we're going to come and specify our testimonials section unordered list, display flex, that'll float them all next to each other. List item, margin is going to be 0 on the top and bottom, 1 em units on the right and left. See that? Isn't that awesome? All right, our contact section. Again, we'll do a position relative here. And in our container inside of it will be display flex because there's 2 columns here. So now this looks ugly. So this iframe is inside of a parent container called contact right. Position will be absolute. Right will be 0. Top will be 0. And then we're going to do width about 45%. Height is going to be 100%. And then our iframe height also has to be set to 100%. Look at that. Very awesome. So that's it for that media query. Now, next one, the final one, and guess what? We're almost done, is to show these 2 elements, which are right here. All right, so we're going to use the before and after pseudo selector on this section, which is feature section. So for this one, we're going to have enough room around 1450 pixels. So features section, we can put and before. Content is empty. Position will be absolute. Width will be about 10%. Height will be, we'll just do 20 em units. Background is going to be var primary color. So now if we save this, we don't yet see it, but don't worry, I'm going to get it so we can see it in a second. Left is going to be 0, and top will be -4 em units. All right, so right now, I do not see it. So let me make sure that we're doing everything right. We'll go ahead and try to ascertain the issue. So let's get out our DevTools. So I want to show that because this is not supposed to happen. Oh wait, that's why. We weren't large enough. We weren't up to 1450. Now it's right there. Okay. And then we're going to do the after. The after is going to allow us to specify the little graphics, the dots. All right, so it's going to be pretty similar, except for width, it's going to be 200 pixels. Height, that'll be 20 em units as well. And the background, this time is going to be a URL. We're going to do images, dots.svg. No repeat, because we don't want it to repeat. All right, there's that. For some reason, the other thing, oh, after. Change that to after. There we go. And then now we have to position it better. So the left is going to be like 4.5 em units, and the top will be like 2 em units. Look at that. Pretty similar to what we have here. All right. Believe it or not, we are actually done. Let me close this. So now we can see what this design looks like and how it's responsive. So on a phone, it's going to look something like this. We're going to get a little bit larger, and then around like a tablet, we're going to have enough room so we can show all of our navigation items. Nothing else changes though. Still looks good. One thing that did change was this, because we went from all of them being collapsed to 2 columns. Then we come out to here, and a lot of stuff changes. So notice how these are all on top of each other, and then they go into one row. And then finally, we come out here, and we have another additional item that shows up just as a graphic. And then also our navigation, this works as well. How awesome is that? All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that. I know that was a whirlwind. That was so much information packed in, and if you're a beginner, you might be discouraged a little bit. Hopefully not. I want you to use this as kind of just a bird's eye view, a macro level perspective of what the process is of front-end development, which is the writing of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You're not going to walk away having a lot of confidence just by watching this one video. You have to keep trying and have to keep learning different things. So with that said, if you want to keep learning more and you're interested in this stuff, definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel here. Click the bell notification icon. Check out my site, DesignCourse.com, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.